There is a special kind of pain that comes from being dismissed by the very people who should have believed in you first. It wears you down in quiet ways. It makes every step feel heavier than it should. And when that pain is mixed with betrayal, mockery, isolation, and fear, it can make even the strongest person wonder if they were wrong to hope for more. But some of the most powerful turning points in life begin right there, in the moment when someone is pushed too far and finally decides they will not break. In these stories, we are going to sit beside writers who were underestimated, cast aside, humiliated, and left to carry burdens that never should have been theirs alone. One of them will walk back into a family dinner with proof no one can deny. Another will face public disgrace and refuse to hide. And before this night is over, we will see that peace does not come from begging for respect. It comes from standing firm long enough to build a life no one else gets to control. So settle in, take a breath, and let us step into the first story together. I built a $1,500,000 company after my parents cut me off and took everything. The night my dad, Victor, took my car keys, I honestly thought my life was over. Not in a dramatic way, just in that quiet, suffocating realization that I had no way forward. My mom, Alina, stood behind him with my phone already in her hand like they had rehearsed it. "You're done with this nonsense, Daniel," my dad said, not even raising his voice. That made it worse. "You're 20, you get a real job or you get out." I remember laughing, which was a mistake. It came out shaky and desperate because I had been working for months on something I knew could change everything, and they were treating it like I was playing video games in my room. "It's not nonsense," I told him. "It's a marketplace. It uses AI to match." "Enough," he snapped, cutting me off like I was 10 years old again. Then he dropped the part that actually hurt. "Your cousin Michael already has a stable job. He's not wasting his life." That comparison hit harder than anything. Michael had always been their gold standard, and I had always been the risk. Within 10 minutes, I had no phone, no car, and no support. By the end of the week, I didn't even have a place to stay because my dad followed through. I left with a backpack, my laptop, and 2 maxed-out credit cards that I had been secretly using to pay for cloud servers. That was all I had left of my nonsense. The first few weeks were brutal in ways I never expected. I slept on a friend's couch until his girlfriend, Jenna, made it clear I was overstaying my welcome. After that, I rotated between cheap hostels, and when money got tight, a 24-hour public library downtown. That library became everything. It had stable internet, outlets that nobody guarded too closely, and just enough anonymity that I could disappear into my work without anyone asking questions. I started getting there before opening, waiting outside like it was a job interview, and leaving after closing when security kicked me out. My project, which I had named ArcLight, was supposed to be an AI-powered marketplace that matched freelancers to micro-gigs in real time based on behavior, not just profiles. It sounds normal now, but at the time, most platforms were still relying on static listings and ratings. I was building something that adapted dynamically, predicting demand before users even posted jobs. The problem was that building something like that with no funding and no safety net is like trying to build a plane while falling. Every server bill felt like a gamble. Every bug felt catastrophic. And every night when I tried to sleep on a borrowed mattress or a library chair, the doubts got louder. Around month 3, I almost quit. Not because it wasn't working, but because it was starting to work just enough to be terrifying. I had early users signing up. A few small businesses were actually using the platform, but scaling meant more server costs, more risk, more debt. I remember staring at my credit card balance one night and realizing I had maybe 2 weeks before everything collapsed. That was the moment I stopped waiting for things to happen and started forcing them. I rewrote the onboarding system in 3 days to reduce friction. I added a referral incentive that I couldn't technically afford but hoped would pay off. I cold emailed hundreds of small business owners, not with a polished pitch, but with raw honesty about what I was building and why it mattered. Most ignored me. Some told me to get a real job, which felt familiar, but a handful said yes. That handful saved me. By month 6, ArcLight was processing enough transactions that I could cover basic server costs without adding more debt. I still wasn't making money personally. I was still sleeping in unstable places. I still didn't have a phone, which made everything harder in ways people don't think about. But the system was alive. It wasn't just an idea anymore. It was something people depended on. That changed how I saw myself. The real turning point came about a year in. A mid-sized logistics company called me through an email thread that had gone back and forth for weeks. The operations manager, Rachel, told me they had been using ArcLight quietly for internal task distribution and wanted to scale it across multiple regions. I tried to sound confident, like I had a team behind me, but it was just me in a library with a dying laptop battery. That deal forced me to level up overnight. I had to improve stability, security, everything. I barely slept for 2 weeks straight, living on vending machine snacks and adrenaline. When their integration went live without crashing, I actually stepped outside the library and just stood there, feeling sunlight like I hadn't in months. From there, things accelerated in a way that felt unreal. More companies came in. Investors started reaching out, not because I was networking, but because the growth was visible. I turned down early low offers because I knew what I had, even when I was still technically broke. Eventually, I accepted a seed round that cleared my debt and gave me room to build properly. I got an apartment. I bought a cheap phone. I even got a car again, though I barely used it. Through all of it, I never contacted my parents. Not out of spite, but because I didn't know what to say. They had made their position clear, and I had made mine. 2 years after the night they kicked me out, my mom called me out of nowhere. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. She said they were having a family dinner and wanted me to come. I knew Michael would be there. I knew exactly how that comparison used to feel, but I went anyway. Walking into that house again felt like stepping into a version of my life that no longer fit. My dad was at the head of the table, same as always. Michael was talking about a promotion. Everything looked normal, like the last 2 years hadn't happened, until my mom asked me carefully what I had been doing. The room got quiet in that way families do when they expect something disappointing. I didn't give a speech, I just told them the truth. I told them about ArcLight, about the users, about the companies. My dad looked skeptical, like he was waiting for the punchline. So I gave him the only number that mattered. We closed our last round at a $1,500,000 valuation, I said. Nobody spoke for a second. Michael actually stopped mid-sentence. My mom looked confused more than anything, like she didn't know how to process it. But my dad just stared at me, really stared, like he was seeing me for the first time. He didn't apologize, that's not who he is. But he nodded once slow and said, "You built that yourself." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything when I answered. "Yeah," I said, "I did." That moment didn't fix everything. It didn't erase what happened or suddenly make us a perfect family. But it closed something that had been open for a long time. I walked out of that dinner not needing their approval anymore, because I had already survived without it. And honestly, that mattered more than the $1,500,000 ever could. What Daniel went through with Victor and Alina was incredibly hard, because being forced out by your own family leaves a wound that takes real strength to carry. But his refusal to give up on ArcLight was the part that mattered most, because he kept building even when the people closest to him could not see his worth. That is why the outcome felt so powerful, not because the pain vanished, but because Daniel proved his own future was never in their hands. And that same lonely kind of pressure is exactly where the next story begins, with loss, shame, and the kind of silence that can make a person feel completely written off. So let us step into the next story together. I lost $8,000 and every friend I had. Then I took the same stage they once laughed me off. I still remember the exact moment my bank app refreshed and showed zero available after the last chargeback hit, because that was also the moment my phone lit up with messages from people I had known since I was 14 telling me I was an idiot who finally got what I deserved. My name is Daniel, and I was 20 when I decided I was going to build something real instead of drifting through another year of pretending college meant anything to me. And yeah, I picked dropshipping because every algorithm on earth told me it was the fastest way to break out. But nobody shows you what it looks like when it collapses in real time and takes your entire life with it. The product was fitness recovery gear, ice compression wraps, massage guns, all bundled under a brand I named Vantacore. And for 2 months it actually worked. I had days where revenue hit 4 figures and I walked around like I had cracked the code to reality, telling my friends Marcus, Jadden, and Kyle that I would cover drinks because money was basically solved now. And they laughed, but not in a bad way yet, more like they thought I got lucky and would crash soon. The crash came faster than anyone expected when my supplier in Shenzhen switched materials without telling me, and suddenly half the orders were defective. Refunds flooded in, Stripe locked my account, customers started posting videos calling my brand a scam, and I sat there refreshing dashboards watching $8,000 evaporate into negative balances and disputes I could not fight. When I tried to explain it in our group chat, Marcus replied with a voice note saying, "Bro, this is what happens when you think you are smarter than everyone else." And Jadden followed with a screenshot of my website captioned delusion.com. And Kyle, who used to be the quiet one, just left the chat entirely, like I had become something contagious. That night, I called my older sister Alina. because I genuinely thought I had ruined my life before it even started, and she told me something that stuck harder than any insult. She said nobody is coming to save you, but that also means nobody gets to decide if you are done except you. I wish I could say I snapped into action immediately, but the truth is I spent 3 weeks barely leaving my room, ignoring calls from my parents who already thought I was wasting my future, scrolling through videos of people my age celebrating wins, while I replayed every decision that led me here. And the worst part was not the money, it was the silence where my social life used to be. No messages, no invites, just this heavy sense that I had been quietly exiled for failing too publicly. The turning point came from something stupid. I was reading a random industry blog trying to understand why my supplier burned me, and I realized every article was surface-level garbage written for clicks. Nobody was actually explaining how supply chains were shifting, or why certain products suddenly spiked and died. And it hit me that while I was chasing quick money, I had accidentally learned a ton about a very specific niche that nobody was packaging properly. So I opened a blank document and wrote the first issue of what I called the Fulfillment Edge, a brutally honest breakdown of what had just happened to me, naming the supplier tactics, the refund patterns, the ad fatigue signals, everything I wished I had known, and I posted it on a free platform with zero expectations, because at that point I had nothing left to lose. The first 50 subscribers felt like a glitch, then it hit 200, then 1,000, and within a month I was getting emails from small e-commerce operators thanking me for saying the quiet parts out loud, people who were dealing with the same issues but had no framework to understand them. I leaned into it hard, waking up every day with one goal: make each issue so useful that someone could directly make or save money from reading it. No fluff, no fake hype, just patterns, data, and brutally clear explanations. By the time I hit 10,000 subscribers, I realized this was not a side project anymore. This was the thing. And for the first time since everything collapsed, I felt in control again, not because I was making insane money yet, but because I was building trust at scale. Around 25,000 subscribers, I started getting sponsorship offers from logistics software companies and analytics platforms. And I was careful because I knew if I turned into another sellout newsletter it would die. So I only partnered with tools I had personally tested, and the revenue started stacking in a way that felt stable instead of explosive, which was new for me. The weird part was how quiet my old life stayed. None of my former friends reached out even as my name started appearing in niche circles, and I told myself it did not matter, but every time I saw someone who looked like Marcus or Jadden on the street, my chest tightened like I had unfinished business with ghosts. At 50,000 subscribers, everything changed again, when I got an email from a conference organizer named Priya, who ran one of the biggest e-commerce events in our region. She said she had been reading The Fulfillment Edge and wanted me to keynote about failure-driven insights, and I honestly thought it was a joke until we got on a call, and she walked me through the audience demographics, founders, operators, even investors, and then she casually mentioned that several attendees had specifically requested me. The night before the talk I barely slept, because all I could think about was the last time I stood in front of people talking about this stuff. I had been laughed out of my own friend group, and now I was about to stand on a stage in front of hundreds of strangers who actually expected value from me. When I walked into the venue the next morning, I saw them almost immediately. Marcus and Jadden sitting near the middle rows with conference badges around their necks, and Kyle a few seats away scrolling on his phone. And for a second, it felt like time snapped backward, and I was that same guy waiting for their approval. But then Priya introduced me, and the room went quiet in that focused way that only happens when people are ready to listen, and something shifted. I did not perform, I told the truth. I walked them through the exact chain of events that led to my collapse, the supplier switch, the refund cascade, the psychological spiral, and then I showed them the frameworks I built afterward, how to detect supplier risk early, how to structure offers that survive quality issues, how to build an audience that outlasts any single product, and I could feel the room leaning in, not because I was charismatic, but because I was precise and honest in a way they were not used to. Halfway through, I looked directly at where Marcus and Jadden were sitting, and they did not look amused anymore. They looked like they were taking notes, and that was the moment I realized the power dynamic had completely flipped without me needing to say a word about it. When I finished, the applause felt less like validation and more like confirmation that the worst thing that had happened to me was actually the raw material for everything that came after. And as people lined up to talk to me afterward, I saw Kyle hovering at the edge like he wanted to approach, but was not sure he was allowed to anymore. Marcus eventually stepped forward and said, "Hey man, that was actually really good." And for a second I considered unloading everything I had held onto, but I did not. I just said thanks and kept it moving because I finally understood something simple and brutal. They did not exile me because I failed. They left because my failure made them uncomfortable about their own lack of risk, and I had been trying to earn back a place in a group that was never built to handle what I was trying to become. I walked out of that venue with more business cards than I could count, new partnerships already forming, and a quiet sense that I had crossed a line internally that no amount of money alone could have given me. And later that night, when I checked my subscriber count and saw it tick past 50,112, I realized the number that once destroyed me. That 8,000 loss had become irrelevant compared to what I had built on top of it. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something close to peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had proven to myself that being written off is sometimes the only space you need to actually become dangerous. What happened to Daniel after the collapse of Vantacore was deeply painful, because Marcus, Jadon and Kyle turned away when he was already at his lowest. But his choice to turn that failure into the fulfillment edge was smart and steady, because he stopped begging for old approval and started building real value instead. That is why the stage moment hit so hard, because his hard work spoke louder than their mockery ever could. And from there, it makes sense to move into a story where fear is not social at all, but private and relentless, the kind that shakes you awake in the dark. So let us read the next story together. I was having panic attacks every night at 20, until I built something that made me $40,000 a month. The worst one hit at 2:17 a.m., and I remember that exact time because I thought I was about to die, and I kept staring at my phone waiting for my heart rate app to prove it. My chest was tight, my hands were numb, and I was sitting on the bathroom floor trying not to wake my mom because I couldn't deal with another conversation about how I was just stressed and needed to be realistic about my future. My name is Daniel, I was 20, and I was completely convinced I was on track to become the biggest failure in my family. Both my older siblings, Jason and Mark, had dropped out of college and drifted between jobs they hated, and every family dinner felt like a quiet warning about what happens when you don't figure your life out early. The problem was I had no idea what figuring it out even looked like, but I knew I was running out of time. Every night, like clockwork, the panic would creep in around midnight, starting as a tight feeling in my chest and escalating into full-blown spirals where I pictured myself at 30, broke, living back at home, with nothing to show for anything. It got so bad that I started avoiding sleep altogether, because falling asleep meant eventually waking up into that dread again. During the day I pretended I was fine, but I was barely functioning, bouncing between half-finished ideas, YouTube rabbit holes, and long stretches of staring at my laptop without actually doing anything meaningful. I told myself I was researching business ideas, but honestly I was just scared to start anything I could fail at. The breaking point came after a fight with my dad, Richard, who straight up told me, "You're drifting just like your brothers, and you don't even see it." That hit harder than anything else because part of me believed he was right. That same week, after another panic attack that left me shaking on the kitchen floor at 3 a.m., I booked a therapist. Her name was Dr. Priya Shah, and in our first session I tried to sound composed, but halfway through explaining my situation I just admitted, "I think I'm going to waste my life." She didn't react the way I expected. No reassurance, no sugarcoating. She just asked, "What are you doing every morning?" That question annoyed me at first because it felt too simple, but when I told her I woke up and immediately scrolled for an hour, she nodded like she'd found something important. She gave me one rule that felt almost stupid: no scrolling for the first 90 minutes of my day, no exceptions. Instead, I had to sit with the discomfort and actually work on something, even if it sucked. The first week was brutal. Without my usual distractions, all the anxiety came rushing in full force, and I had multiple mornings where I just stared at my screen feeling like a fraud. But eventually, something shifted. I started noticing how many ideas I'd been avoiding because I was afraid they were good enough. One of those ideas was a Chrome extension I had half-built months earlier that helped people block addictive websites during work sessions, but with a twist that tracked avoidance patterns and gave brutally honest feedback. I had abandoned it because I convinced myself no one would care. With Dr. Shah's rule in place, I forced myself to open that project every morning before anything else. At first, I just fixed small bugs, then I started adding features, and slowly it turned into something real. The anxiety didn't go away, but it changed. Instead of being this vague, overwhelming fear, it became tied to specific actions, like pushing an update or showing the product to someone for the first time. I remember the first time I shared it with someone outside my immediate circle, a guy named Ethan I met in an online forum. My hands were shaking when I sent him the link, and I almost closed my laptop immediately after. When he replied, "This is actually really good," I didn't believe him. I assumed he was just being polite. That was the imposter syndrome talking, and it was constant. Every small win felt like a fluke, like I was somehow tricking people into thinking I knew what I was doing. The real turning point came when I decided to launch it publicly anyway. I posted it on a productivity subreddit with a short, honest description, expecting maybe a handful of users. Instead, the post blew up overnight. I woke up to thousands of installs, dozens of comments, and my inbox flooded with messages. My first reaction wasn't excitement, it was panic. I was convinced people would realize it wasn't that good, that they'd find flaws I missed, that the whole thing would collapse. And to be fair, things did break. The servers couldn't handle the load, users complained, and I had to scramble to fix issues in real time. That week was chaos, but it forced me into action in a way nothing else had. I stopped overthinking and just started solving problems as they came up. I added a premium version almost as an afterthought, pricing it low because I didn't think anyone would actually pay. Within days, people were subscribing. Not a lot at first, but enough to make me realize this could be more than just a side project. I doubled down. Every morning, no scrolling, straight into work. Every evening, dealing with feedback, fixing bugs, improving features. The panic attacks didn't disappear overnight, but they became less frequent, and when they did happen, they felt less like the end of the world and more like a signal that I was pushing into something uncomfortable. My family didn't immediately understand what I was doing. My dad was skeptical, my mom was supportive but confused, and my brothers didn't really say much. It wasn't until I showed them actual numbers that things started to shift. The week before my 21st birthday, the extension hit $40,000 in monthly recurring revenue. I remember staring at the dashboard, refreshing it over and over because I couldn't process it. Just a few months earlier, I was convinced I was on the verge of becoming exactly what I feared. Now I had something real, something I built from scratch. When I told my dad, he just looked at me for a long moment and said, "I didn't see this coming." It wasn't some dramatic movie moment, but it meant a lot. The weirdest part is that the fear never fully goes away. Even now, there are days where I feel like I'm one mistake away from losing everything, like I somehow got lucky and it could all disappear. But I've learned that feeling doesn't mean I'm failing, it just means I'm doing something that matters to me. If I could go back to that 17 a.m. version of myself on the bathroom floor, I wouldn't tell him everything works out perfectly. I'd just tell him to start anyway, even if it feels pointless, even if it feels like he's faking it. Because the only real way to become the person you're afraid you're not is to act like you might be, long enough for it to become true. Daniel's struggle with panic attacks was exhausting in a way most people never see, because the battle was happening inside his own body every single night. Yet he did the brave thing by listening to Dr. Priya Shah, cutting the noise, and building something real before fear could keep owning his mornings. That is why the $40,000 month felt earned, because he did not wait for confidence first, he built it through action. And the next story carries that same quiet kind of survival, only this time the pressure comes from isolation, where one small choice to speak up changes everything. So let us move into the next story together. I went 11 days without speaking to anyone and accidentally built $1 million company from my basement. I realized I hadn't spoken out loud on day 11 when my voice cracked trying to order coffee from a self-checkout machine that didn't even need me to talk. I was living in a basement in a city I picked because rent was cheap and nobody I knew lived there, which at the time felt strategic and efficient, like I was optimizing my burn rate instead of admitting I had nowhere else to go. My name is Daniel, I was 20, and I had just burned through everything I saved trying to build a startup that quietly failed without anyone noticing, which somehow felt worse than public failure. The basement had no windows, just a low ceiling, a mattress on the floor, and a folding table where I kept my laptop and a single lamp that made everything look like it existed underwater. I told myself I was focused, that isolation was a competitive advantage, but by day 5 I was eating protein bars for dinner because going outside felt like an unnecessary expense of energy. By day 7 I stopped checking my phone because no one was texting anyway. By day 11, I caught myself rehearsing conversations in my head just to hear something resembling a human voice. That was the moment something in me snapped, not in a dramatic way, more like a quiet internal admission that if I kept going like this, I was going to disappear without anyone noticing. So I opened X and wrote a thread, not polished, not strategic, just raw. I titled it Day 11 of Building a Company Alone in a Basement with No Windows, and I wrote exactly what was happening. I wrote about the silence, the doubt, the fact that I had $43 left in my bank account and no real plan. I posted it and expected nothing because that had become my baseline expectation for everything. But within an hour, people started responding. At first it was a few likes, then replies, then strangers telling me they felt the same way or asking what I was building. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I existed outside that basement. So I did it again the next day and the next. Every morning I posted a founder diary, documenting everything, the small wins, the bigger failures, the mental spiral at 3 a.m. when I convinced myself I was wasting my life. I didn't try to sound impressive, I just told the truth. Around day 17, a guy named Marcus replied to one of my threads with a brutally honest breakdown of my product idea. He wasn't being mean, just precise in a way that cut through my delusion. Instead of getting defensive, I messaged him and asked if he wanted to talk. We ended up on a call that lasted 3 hours, my first real conversation in over 2 weeks, and he understood the problem better than I did. Marcus was 21, living in another country, and had been quietly building tools in the same space I was struggling with. By the end of that call, we decided to rebuild everything together. That was the midpoint, even if I didn't realize it then. I stopped being a guy alone in a basement hoping something worked, and became someone actively building with another person who could challenge me. We split responsibilities. I focused on distribution and storytelling. He handled the product architecture, and the daily threads became our growth engine. But things didn't suddenly get easier. If anything, the pressure increased because now I had someone else relying on me. My family found out I had dropped out and moved to a random city, and they were not supportive. My mom, Linda, called me crying, asking what I was doing with my life, and my dad, Robert, told me I needed to come home and get a real job before I ruined my future. I couldn't explain what I was doing because from the outside, it looked exactly like failure. Meanwhile, my bank account hit $12, and I started calculating how many days I could survive on instant noodles. The threads kept growing though, slowly at first, then faster. People were following the story, not just the product. They cared about whether I would make it out of that basement. Around month 3, one of those threads reached someone named Alina who worked at a mid-sized logistics company. She messaged me asking if our tool could solve a specific problem they had. The honest answer was no, not yet, but I told her we could build it. Marcus and I spent the next 72 hours barely sleeping, patching together a version that worked just well enough to demo. The call with Alina felt like everything was on the line because it was. If she said no, I had no runway left. If she said yes, we had a chance. Halfway through the demo, something broke. The interface froze and I felt my chest tighten like the room was closing in. But instead of panicking, I told her exactly what happened and how we would fix it. No pretending, no corporate polish, just honesty. She paused, then said she appreciated the transparency and asked how quickly we could deploy a stable version. When she said they were willing to be our first paying client, I muted the call and just stared at the wall because I didn't know how to process it. That contract didn't make us rich, but it pulled me back from zero. It validated that we weren't just telling a story, we were building something real. From there, everything became a series of escalating challenges. Delivering for Alina's company nearly broke us because every bug felt like it could end everything. Scaling meant new problems we weren't prepared for. The threads kept growing, which helped, but also created pressure because now people were watching. I still lived in that basement for another year, still waking up to artificial light, still eating at my desk, but it no longer felt like a dead end. It felt like a launch point. Marcus and I eventually hired 2 more people from our audience, people who had been following the journey and understood what we were trying to build. My relationship with my parents slowly shifted when they saw it wasn't a phase. By month 12, we had multiple enterprise clients and actual revenue that covered more than just survival. By month 18, I signed a lease on a loft with massive windows that flooded the room with sunlight in a way that felt almost unreal after so long underground. The first morning I woke up there, I just stood in the middle of the room and let the light hit my face, and it felt like proof that the worst version of my life had been temporary. I still think about those 11 days of silence because they were the edge. If I had gone a little further without reaching out, even in the smallest way, I don't know if I would have come back from it. Posting those threads didn't just build a company, it pulled me out of isolation one message at a time. And the weird part is, the thing that finally worked wasn't some genius strategy or breakthrough idea. It was just me telling the truth when everything felt like it was falling apart, and someone on the other side deciding to listen. What Daniel lived through in that basement was heartbreaking, because 11 days of silence can make a person feel like they are slipping away from the world. But he chose honesty instead of hiding, and that was what turned everything around, because the truth brought Marcus, Elena, and the rest of the team into his corner. That is why the company could grow, because he stopped trying to endure everything alone and let real help in. And the next story takes that same spirit of truth into a much sharper fight, where public shame tries to define a young founder overnight. So let us read the next story together. My agency was exposed as a scam overnight, and I had 30 days to prove everyone wrong. I woke up to 600 missed notifications and a text from Ethan that just said, "Bro, we are finished." And for a second, I thought someone died until I opened TikTok and saw my own face under the word scam in giant red letters. The video had 2.3 million views and climbing, posted by a guy named Tyler Green, who I had signed as a client 3 weeks earlier, and he was telling the world my agency stole his money, ghosted him, and faked results, complete with screenshots of our DMs ripped completely out of context. My stomach dropped so hard I actually felt dizzy sitting on the edge of my bed. I was 19, running a small marketing agency out of my apartment in Johannesburg, and up until that morning I thought I was doing pretty well. We had 14 active clients, most of them small e-commerce brands, and I had finally convinced my parents that I wasn't just wasting my life online. Within an hour, 8 clients emailed asking for refunds. By noon, 3 had already filed disputes with their banks. By 3 p.m., my Stripe account was frozen. That video didn't just hurt my reputation, it basically shut off my ability to operate overnight. I called Tyler immediately, and he declined twice before answering on the third attempt, sounding weirdly calm like he'd already moved on from the damage he'd just caused. I asked him why he posted it, and he said, "Because you weren't delivering," which wasn't even true. We were literally mid-campaign and his ads had just started picking up traction, but he didn't care. He said the video was already doing numbers, and he wasn't taking it down unless I refunded him plus an extra $2,000 for wasted time. I didn't have that kind of cash sitting around. Between paying freelancers and ad spend float, I had maybe $3,000 total, and if I gave him that, I'd have nothing left to fulfill any remaining clients, which would just make the scam narrative real. That was the moment it hit me that this wasn't just about one angry client anymore. It was about whether I was going to be labeled a fraud at 19 and carry that reputation into everything I tried to build after. I spent that entire night pacing, reading comments, watching my name get dragged by strangers who were convinced they were exposing some mastermind scammer, when in reality I was just a kid figuring things out in real time. Around 2 a.m., after spiraling for hours, I made the one decision that probably saved everything. If people thought I was hiding something, I was going to show them everything. The next morning I posted my own TikTok titled, "I might lose everything, but here's the truth," and I laid it all out. I showed every contract, every deliverable, every ad report, including Tyler's campaign performance up to that point. I admitted where we messed up too, like delayed communication and overpromising timelines, but I made it clear we were not scamming anyone. Then I said something that scared me even as I said it out loud. I announced that over the next 30 days I would publicly document every single refund, every fix, every client interaction, and rebuild the agency in the open so no one could ever question what we were doing again. The video got buried at first under the hate wave, but a few people started noticing the transparency. Day 1, I refunded 3 clients fully, even though 2 of them had already received work that technically fulfilled the contract. That hurt financially, but I needed to reset trust. I recorded the transactions, blurred sensitive info, and posted them. Day 3, I shared our internal systems, how we onboard clients, how we track ad performance, and where breakdowns were happening. People started commenting things like, "No scammer would show this much," and slowly the tone shifted from pure hate to curiosity. Meanwhile, my personal life was collapsing. My dad called me after seeing the original viral video and said I had embarrassed the family and needed to shut it down before I made things worse. My mom just sounded worried but didn't understand any of it. My friends stopped bringing up the business entirely, like it was something shameful. I basically isolated myself in my apartment, working 16-hour days fixing processes, handling angry emails, and recording updates for TikTok. Around day 10, I hit my lowest point. My bank balance dropped below 500 after refunds and expenses, and I remember staring at my screen wondering if I should just delete everything and disappear from the internet entirely. That same night, I got a DM from a small brand owner named Melissa Carter who said she had seen both Tyler's video and my response series and wanted to give us a shot specifically because of the transparency. That message snapped me out of it. I onboarded her the next morning and documented the entire process step by step, showing exactly what we were doing differently this time. Her campaign ended up performing well within the first week, nothing crazy but solid, and I shared the results in real time. That became a turning point. More people started following the series, not because of the drama anymore, but because they were actually learning from it. By day 20, I had rebuilt up to 9 active clients, all fully aware of the situation and choosing to work with us anyway. Then something unexpected happened. I got an email from someone named David Klein, who turned out to be a senior marketing director at a Fortune 500 retail company. At first I thought it was a prank, but the email was legit, corporate domain and all. He said their team had been watching my content internally and were impressed by the level of transparency and accountability, especially in a space where most agencies hide behind vague reports. He asked if I would be open to a pilot project, managing a specific segment of their digital campaigns under a fully transparent reporting model. I read that email at least 10 times before replying because it felt unreal. I was still a 19-year-old kid who 2 weeks earlier was being called a scammer by millions of people. We set up a call, and I didn't try to act bigger than I was. I told him exactly where we were, what we had learned, and what systems we had rebuilt. He said that was precisely why they were interested, because we had already stress-tested failure in public and come out with a stronger process. On day 30 of my series, I posted the final update titled From Cancelled to Contract Signed and showed the signed agreement, obviously redacting sensitive details. That video blew up in a completely different way. Instead of hate, it was people saying they had followed the entire journey and couldn't believe the turnaround. Even some of the original critics came back admitting they were wrong. Tyler never took down his video, but it stopped mattering. If anything, it became the first chapter of the story instead of the ending. Looking back, the worst part wasn't the financial hit or even the public humiliation. It was how close I came to believing the narrative about myself. Once that doubt sets in, you start acting like it's true. The only reason I got through it was because I forced everything into the open where I couldn't hide or quit quietly. Now the agency is bigger than it ever was before, but more importantly, it's built on systems and transparency that probably wouldn't exist if that video never happened. I still keep that first TikTok saved on my phone, the one calling me a scam, because as much as I hate it, it's the reason any of this exists at all. What Daniel went through when Tyler's video hit was deeply unfair, because getting branded a scammer overnight can make even a steady person feel cornered. But his decision to show everything in the open was the right one, because honesty stripped the fear of its power and gave Melissa, David, and the others a reason to trust him again. That is why the turnaround felt so strong, because he answered public shame with discipline instead of hiding. And the next story carries that same pressure inward, where the body itself forces a halt, and the lesson becomes learning that strength also means letting go. So let us read the next story together. The day my body quit and my company doubled without me. I remember the exact second my legs stopped listening, because I was standing in my kitchen arguing with my dad on speaker about whether I was throwing my life away, and then everything tunneled, and I hit the tile hard enough to chip a tooth. My name is Ryan Patel. I was 20, and I had not slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks because I was trying to keep a company alive that barely deserved the word company. When I woke up, there was a paramedic named Jason asking me what year it was, and I said 2025 even though it was 2026, and he gave me a look that said this was not good. At the hospital, Dr. Lindu Nkosi told me my cortisol levels were wrecked, my heart rate was erratic, and if I kept going like this, I would do permanent damage. She used the phrase adrenal fatigue, even though she said it was a simplified label for a cluster of stress-related dysfunctions, and then she said the sentence that felt like a death sentence to me: "You cannot work for at least 6 months." I laughed at her because it sounded like a joke, and then I realized she was not joking, and I felt something inside me crack harder than my tooth. The company was called Threadline, a scrappy platform that matched small online sellers with local fulfillment partners, and at that point it was me, a glitchy backend, 37 paying customers, and a burn rate that made no sense for something that small. I had raised a tiny friends and family round from people like my cousin Arjun and my neighbor Mr. Cumulo, and I had promised them I would not quit. My dad, Sanjay Patel, thought the whole thing was irresponsible and wanted me back in university. My mom, Kavita Patel, tried to play peacemaker, but I could see the worry in her face every time I came home looking like I had been awake for a week. Lying in that hospital bed, IV in my arm, I realized I had built something that depended entirely on me not collapsing, and I had just proven that I could collapse at any moment. The first 2 days I tried to secretly work from my phone, answering support tickets under the blanket like a kid hiding snacks, until Nurse Tandy Maziko caught me and told me if I did not rest they would restrict my devices. That was when the panic really hit because I knew I was about to lose control. The only people who even vaguely knew how Threadline worked were 2 contractors I had hired off the internet, Daniel Reyes in Mexico City, who handled back-end fixes, and Aisha Khan in Karachi, who did customer support and onboarding. They were good, but they were not me, and the system in my head was not written down anywhere. On the 3rd night, after another call with my dad where he said maybe this was a sign to shut it down, I stared at the ceiling and realized I had 2 choices: either cling to control and watch everything collapse, or let go and risk it collapsing anyway. So I texted Daniel and Aisha and asked if they could jump on a call. I told them everything, no filters, the hospital, the diagnosis, the 6 months, and I expected hesitation or excuses, but instead Daniel just said we will figure it out, and Aisha said send us everything you have. Over the next 48 hours, I dumped my brain into documents, messy diagrams, voice notes, half-coherent instructions about how pricing worked and which customers were high-risk churn, and how to manually reroute orders when the API broke. It felt like tearing pieces out of my head and handing them over. Then I gave them access to everything: Stripe, the database, the email accounts, and I set a rule for myself that I would not log in again. The first week after I stopped working was worse than any all-nighter because I kept imagining fires everywhere, customers leaving, payments failing, Daniel and Aisha quitting. My dad visited and tried to talk about backup plans, internships, normal life, and I snapped at him in a way I never had before. We did not speak for a week after that. Meanwhile, my phone would light up with Slack notifications, and I would physically turn it face down like it was something dangerous. Dr. Nkosi had recommended therapy, so I started sessions with a psychologist named Dr. Payata Vandaya Murwi, who did not care about my startup at all, and instead kept asking me why I thought my worth was tied to how much I could endure. I hated those sessions at first because they made me feel exposed, but slowly I started to realize how much of my identity I had welded to constant stress. The isolation was brutal because all my friends were either in university or working normal jobs, and I was stuck at home recovering, feeling like I had failed at the one thing I chose instead of a normal path. About 6 weeks in, something strange happened. The Slack notifications became less frantic. When I finally allowed myself to skim updates without engaging, I saw that Daniel had refactored parts of the backend I had been patching for months, and Aisha had implemented a structured onboarding flow that cut support tickets in half. They had also started making small decisions without me, like adjusting pricing tiers and experimenting with partnerships I had not even considered. It was unsettling because it meant 2 things at once. The company did not need me as much as I thought, and it might actually survive. Around month 3, my dad and I had a long conversation where I admitted I had been scared of losing control more than I had been scared of losing the company, and he admitted he had been scared of losing me more than he had been skeptical of the business. It did not fix everything, but it shifted something. By month 5, I was sleeping normally, exercising lightly, and my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I still had moments of doubt where I wondered if I would come back and find nothing left, but those moments were less frequent. At exactly 6 months, Dr. Nkosi cleared me to return to work gradually, and the night before I logged back in, I barely slept, not from burnout this time, but from anticipation. When I finally opened my laptop and logged into the dashboard, I thought there was a bug because the numbers did not make sense. Revenue was more than double what it had been when I left, churn was down, and there were over 100 active customers. I called Daniel and Aisha immediately, and they walked me through everything they had done, the systems they had built, the mistakes they had made and fixed, and I felt this mix of pride and humility that is hard to describe. Then Aisha said there is one more thing and sent me a link. It was an email thread with a partner at a top-tier venture capital firm I had cold emailed months before collapsing and never heard back from. They had re-engaged after seeing our growth and had sent over a term sheet. I just stared at the screen for a long time because it felt unreal that the thing I thought would die without me had grown in my absence. The real turning point was not the collapse in my kitchen. It was the moment I stopped trying to be the single point of failure for everything. I did not magically become balanced overnight, and I still have to watch myself when I start slipping into old patterns, but now Threadline is not just me holding everything together with caffeine and anxiety. It is a system, a team, and something that can survive even when I cannot operate at full capacity. Signing that term sheet a few weeks later felt less like a victory lap, and more like a quiet confirmation that stepping back had saved both me and the company, even if it took me hitting the floor to finally understand that. What Ryan went through after collapsing in the kitchen was frightening and exhausting, because no one wants to learn their limits through a hospital bed. But the way he handed Threadline to Daniel and Aisha was wise, because he stopped trying to be the only thing holding everything together and gave the company room to breathe. That is why the growth after his recovery felt earned, because the business became stronger when he finally stopped carrying it alone. And the next story moves into a different kind of disaster, where one mistake wipes out everything at once, and the only way forward is to rebuild with humility. So let us step into the next story together. I accidentally deleted my entire startup at 19 and owed $22,000 overnight. I knew something was wrong the second Stripe started firing off refund notifications faster than my phone could vibrate. And by the time I logged into the admin panel, everything was already gone, like someone had vacuumed my entire company out of existence, while I was still sitting there in my bedroom thinking I was finally getting ahead. My name is Ethan. I was 19 at the time, and I had built a small but growing SaaS tool with about 1,800 paying users. Nothing insane, but enough that I was clearing around $8,500 a month and starting to believe I might actually not screw up my life. The product was simple, a workflow automation dashboard for freelancers, but people liked it because it worked and I answered every support message myself. That night I pushed what I thought was a harmless server config update after watching a tutorial from a guy named Victor Lin. And instead of optimizing performance, I pointed the production database to a fresh empty instance and ran a migration script that effectively wiped every single user record, payment link, and subscription mapping. I did not realize what I had done until customers started emailing me saying their accounts were blank and their data was missing, and within 30 minutes Stripe started automatically flagging disputes because my webhook endpoint was returning errors. I remember staring at my screen, refreshing, hoping it was a caching issue or some glitch, but it was not. I had no backups. I had skipped setting up automated backups because I told myself I would do it after exams. I never did. By midnight I had a support inbox with 300 unread messages, a Stripe dashboard showing pending refunds climbing past 22,000, and a product that was effectively dead. I walked downstairs and told my dad, Marcus, what happened, and he just stared at me like I had set our house on fire, then asked me if I understood that I might be in legal trouble if I could not restore user data. My mom, Angela, tried to calm things down, but I could hear the panic in her voice when she asked how much money I owed. I said 22,000, and it felt like I was saying my own sentence out loud. The next morning I posted a transparent update to users explaining everything, and I expected everyone to leave. Most of them did. By the end of the day, my active subscribers dropped from 1,800 to under 200. I had maybe 1,400 left in my bank account after covering immediate refunds, and more disputes were still coming in. I did not sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. Somewhere around hour 60 of being awake, I stopped thinking about saving the old version and started thinking about building something new from the wreckage because there was nothing left to restore. That was the moment everything shifted from panic to decision. I emailed every single former user individually, not with a template but real messages, telling them I was rebuilding from scratch in 30 days, that I would give them lifetime access at a heavily discounted rate if they came back, and that I would personally migrate any data they still had saved locally. Most people ignored me. Some told me to get lost. A few, like Daniel Reyes and Priya Nair, replied with something I did not expect, which was cautious support. Daniel said he respected that I owned the mistake. Priya said she would give me one more chance if I could prove reliability. That was enough. I locked myself in my room and started rebuilding the entire platform, this time with proper architecture, automated backups every hour, and a staging environment so I would never again deploy blind. Every day felt like dragging myself through concrete. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always said no. My girlfriend at the time, Chloe Bennett, broke up with me after 2 weeks because I would not even answer calls anymore. My parents started arguing about whether I should just get a normal job and cut my losses. I understood their point, but I could not let it end like that because then the last year of my life would just be a story about how I failed publicly and owed people money I could not pay back. Around day 18, I hit a wall where nothing was working and I seriously considered quitting. But then I got another email from Priya asking for an update and something about that pulled me back in. I sent her a rough demo build that barely worked, and she replied within an hour saying it was already better than before. That one message carried me through the next 12 days. On day 30, I relaunched. It was not perfect, but it was stable, fast, and backed up properly. I sent out another round of emails to the original user base, expecting maybe 50 people to come back. Instead, around 230 signed up within the first week, including Daniel and Priya. The lifetime discount offer helped, but more than that, people told me they trusted the transparency. I kept building, kept improving, and this time I treated reliability like the core feature instead of something optional. By the time I turned 20, the product had climbed back to around 40,000 AR. Not life-changing, but proof that I was not done. The biggest shift came when Daniel introduced the tool to his agency network, which brought in higher-value clients who actually depended on it daily. That forced me to level up support, uptime, and everything else. I hired my first contractor, a back-end developer named Luis Ortega, to help stabilize the system. It felt insane to pay someone when I had nearly gone bankrupt months earlier, but it was the right move. By 21, the platform crossed 100,000 AR. I remember refreshing the dashboard and just sitting there, not celebrating, just processing how close I had come to losing everything because of one careless mistake. The debt was cleared, the angry emails had stopped, and the same product that almost ruined me was now the thing keeping me afloat. I still think about that night every time I deploy anything. I still double-check backups even when automation says they are fine. And every time a new user signs up, I remember that there was a moment when none of this existed anymore, because I deleted it with my own hands and had to decide whether I was going to disappear with it or build it again from nothing. What Ethan lived through after deleting his startup was brutal, because waking up to 22,000 in refunds and no way to restore the past is the kind of mistake that can shake a young person to the core. But his choice to own it, email every user, and rebuild properly was exactly what saved him, because he stopped pretending and started earning trust back one step at a time. That is why the relaunch mattered so much, because people did not come back for perfection, they came back for responsibility. And the next story carries that same survival energy, only this time the pressure is immediate, with homelessness, a clock, and one deal that has to land. So let us read the next story together. I closed a 12,000 MRR deal 6 hours before my laptop was repossessed. I was watching the battery icon tick down to 9% when Daniel texted me a photo of my stuff on the curb. Not a threat, not even a message, just a photo like a receipt for a decision already made. My duffel bag, my chair, the cheap desk I bought off Facebook Marketplace, all sitting outside our building in Braamfontein like someone had vomited my life onto the pavement. I called him immediately and he didn't pick up. Then he sent one line, "Sorry bro, landlord changed locks." That was it. I was 19, broke, and officially homeless because my parents wouldn't co-sign a lease, and Daniel had decided I was too much of a risk. I stared at the code on my screen, a half-working billing integration for a SaaS product nobody was paying for yet, and I felt something in my chest tighten so hard I thought I might black out. I packed what I could carry from the curb while pretending I wasn't about to panic in public. Then I walked straight to the only place I could think of that stayed open all night, a co-working space called Gridline, where I had a student membership I could barely afford. I told the receptionist, Priya, that I needed a quiet desk for the night. She looked at my bags, then at me and said, "Just don't sleep here." I nodded and lied. The first night I didn't sleep anyway. I just coded until my hands started shaking and my vision blurred. The product was a workflow automation tool for small agencies, something I convinced myself could hit 10,000 MRR in 6 months. At that point it was at zero. My savings were already gone, burned on hosting, tools, and a stupid rebrand I thought would make me look legit. My parents had told me to come home 2 weeks earlier. My dad, Mark, said, "This is not a business, it's a hobby that's eating your future." My mom, Elaine, just asked if I was eating properly. When I told them I needed a co-signer, my dad said no without even asking details. "If you fail clean," he said. I hung up on him and doubled down. Now I was here, trying to push code while my entire life fit into 2 bags under a desk that wasn't mine. The second night I slept for maybe an hour with my head on my keyboard and woke up to Priya tapping my shoulder. "You can't do that," she said quietly. I apologized, bought another day pass I couldn't afford, and promised I wouldn't do it again. I did it again that same night. By day 4, the panic attacks started. They came out of nowhere, like my body finally caught up to the reality my brain had been avoiding. My heart would race, my hands would go numb, and I'd feel this wave of certainty that I was about to die right there between 2 monitors and a half-empty coffee cup. I started timing them, like if I could measure them, I could control them. 6 minutes, 8 minutes, once almost 10. I'd breathe through it, stare at the code, and then keep going because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant spiraling. On day 7, I got my first real lead. A guy named Ethan, who ran a mid-sized marketing agency in Cape Town, booked a demo after finding me through a forum post I barely remembered writing. I almost cancelled because I looked like I hadn't slept in a week, which was basically true, but I forced myself to show up. I did the demo from a phone booth in the co-working space, so nobody would hear how shaky my voice was. Ethan asked good questions, the kind that exposed every gap in my product. Halfway through, I realized he could tell I was bluffing on a few features, so I stopped. I said, "Look, I'm going to be honest. Half of what you want isn't built yet, but I can build it in 2 weeks if you're willing to work with me." There was a long silence. Then he said, "I like that you didn't try to sell me nonsense. Send me a proposal." That was the first time in weeks I felt something that wasn't dread. I worked like a man possessed after that call. I rewrote core parts of the system, fixed bugs I had been ignoring, and built a basic version of the features Ethan asked for. I stopped checking my bank account because I already knew the number was close to 0. On day 14, Priya pulled me aside. "Are you living here?" she asked. I tried to laugh it off, but she didn't smile. "You can't keep doing this," she said. "Management will notice." I told her I just needed a few more days. She sighed and said, 3 days, then you need a real plan." That night my laptop started making a clicking noise. It was subtle at first, then louder, like something inside it was giving up. I checked my email and saw the notice I had been avoiding. My payment plan for the laptop was overdue by 2 months. Final warning. Repossession scheduled within 72 hours if no payment received. I felt the panic rising again, sharper this time because it had a clock attached to it. No laptop meant no product. No product meant no deal. No deal meant I was done. I emailed Ethan the proposal at 2:13 a.m. and priced it at 12,000 MRR, way higher than I thought he'd accept because if I was going down, I wasn't doing it small. He replied the next morning asking for a call. I spent the next 6 hours rehearsing every objection I could think of while also trying to keep my system from crashing. The clicking noise was constant now. When the call started, Ethan didn't waste time. 12,000 is steep for something that's not fully built, he said. I swallowed and said, "You're not paying for what it is today. You're paying for what it becomes with your input shaping it. I'll give you priority support, custom features, and direct access to me." He asked, "And if you disappear?" I looked around at the co-working space, at people who had normal lives and stable jobs, and I said, "I can't afford to disappear." He was quiet for a moment, then he laughed softly. "Fair enough, send the contract." My hands were shaking so badly I had to type twice as slow to avoid mistakes. I sent the contract, then I waited. 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. The battery dropped to 15%. I plugged in, but the charger connection was loose and kept disconnecting. I held it in place with one hand and refreshed my inbox with the other. At 4:47 p.m. the email came through. Signed. I opened it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then I checked the payment notification. 12,000 MRR, first invoice paid. I just sat there staring at the screen, not even reacting at first because my brain couldn't catch up. Then it hit me all at once and I started laughing, like full-on laughing in the middle of this quiet office. Priya looked over, confused, and I just held up my phone and said, "I did it." She didn't know what I meant, but she smiled anyway. 6 hours later, 2 guys showed up asking for me by name. They said they were there about the laptop. I told them I had just paid and showed them the confirmation. One of them checked his tablet, nodded, and said, "Looks like it cleared." They left without another word. I sat back down, finally let go of the charger I had been holding like it was life support, and for the first time in 3 weeks I allowed myself to think about tomorrow. I called my mom that night. She cried when I told her what happened. My dad got on the line after and said, "So it's real now?" I said, "Yeah, it's real." He didn't apologize and I didn't ask him to. I didn't need it anymore. The next morning I booked a small studio apartment with my own name on the lease, no co-signer, no backup plan. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And when I set up my desk and opened my laptop, it didn't feel like I was trying to prove something anymore. It felt like I had survived something that was trying to break me, and for once, I had won. What happened to Ryan at the co-working space was tense from the start, because there is nothing easy about trying to build while your life is packed into 2 bags. But the way he spoke honestly to Ethan, then held his ground long enough to close the deal, was powerful because he proved that desperation does not have to mean dishonesty. That is why the laptop being taken back almost felt like a test he had already outgrown, since the deal gave him enough standing to keep moving forward. And the next story takes that same kind of pressure and turns it into a legal fight, where one letter threatens everything and the only way through is courage. So let us step into the next story together. My 20th birthday gift from a tech giant was a lawsuit threat that could have ended everything before I even started. I still remember the exact moment my life split into before and after. It was 3 weeks past my 20th birthday, May of 2026, and I was sitting in my childhood bedroom in Johannesburg, the same one I had slept in since I was 12. My startup, a small task automation app called FlowState, had just hit 5,000 active users. I was celebrating with a cheap pizza and a warm Coke when an email arrived from a law firm representing Nexus Dynamics, one of the biggest productivity software companies in the world. The subject line was a cold punch to the gut: cease and desist patent infringement notice. My hands started shaking so hard I dropped my phone. The letter claimed that my core feature, a dynamic workflow builder that adapted to user behavior, infringed on their patent filed in 2024. They demanded I shut down FlowState immediately and sign over all user data and code, or face a lawsuit that would bury me in debt for decades. I read that email 40 times, convinced it was a prank. It was not. I called my dad first. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "Marcus, maybe you should just comply. They have an army of lawyers." "You have what? A laptop and a dream." My mom got on the line and started crying, asking why I could not just get a normal job, why I had to be so stubborn, why I had to put our family at risk. I hung up feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. My girlfriend at the time, Sarah, did not even wait for me to explain. She said, "Jake, this is insane. You are 20. You are not built for this kind of war." She left that night, taking her plants and her cat, and I did not see her again for over a year. I sat on my floor and stared at the wall until the sun came up, the cease and desist glowing on my screen like a death sentence. I had 2 choices: fold and disappear, or fight and risk losing everything I had ever worked for. I chose to fight, but I had no idea how close I was to breaking. The next 3 months were the darkest of my life. I responded to Nexus with a polite letter explaining that my code was built on open source libraries, nothing proprietary, nothing stolen. Their lawyer replied with a single sentence: "Your response is inadequate. Cease operations within 7 days or we proceed." I knew I needed a real attorney, but the cheapest one I found wanted a retainer of 50,000 Rand. I had less than 5,000 in my bank account, and that was supposed to last me until my next freelance gig. I started skipping meals, telling my parents I was eating at friends' houses, when really I was surviving on instant noodles and stale bread. I stopped answering calls from anyone who was not directly involved in keeping FlowState alive. My friends stopped inviting me out. My social media went silent. I became a ghost in my own life, waking up at dawn, coding until my eyes burned, researching patent law until my brain felt like mush, then staring at the ceiling wondering if I had made a catastrophic mistake. The self-doubt was the worst part. It whispered to me at 3 in the morning, telling me I was arrogant, that I was a kid playing in a league of adults, that Nexus was right, and I was just too stubborn to admit I was wrong. I almost gave up. I had the shutdown email drafted and ready to send. I saved it 3 separate times, but something in me, some stupid, reckless, unkillable part of me refused to let them win. I posted my story on a small tech forum, not expecting anything. I laid out the timeline, the patent claims, the open source libraries I had used, and asked if anyone had faced something similar. Within hours, my post was everywhere. Developers from all over the world started reaching out, sharing their own stories of being bullied by big tech. A user named Dev Linus, a senior engineer from Berlin, messaged me and said, "Jake, I have seen this patent. It is vague, overly broad, and your implementation is fundamentally different. You are not infringing, but you need proof and you need a lawyer who gets it." He introduced me to Alina, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney in Cape Town who specialized in IP law for startups. She agreed to take my case pro bono if I could raise the court filing fees. I started a crowdfunding campaign, not as a charity, but as a statement. I promised that if we won, Flow State would remain free and open source forever. The response was overwhelming. In 2 weeks, we raised over 200,000 Rand from more than 3,000 people across 6 continents. I was not alone anymore. I had an army. The legal battle dragged on for 8 months, a grueling marathon of depositions, evidence submissions, and sleepless nights. Nexus kept pushing, filing motions, delaying, trying to bleed me dry. But Alina was relentless. She found a prior art document from a 2022 GitHub repository that completely dismantled their patent claims. She uncovered emails showing that Nexus had known my app existed for months before sending the cease and desist, proving this was a targeted hit, not a genuine infringement concern. The turning point came in January of 2027, just after my 21st birthday. We were in court for a preliminary hearing, and the Nexus lawyer, a slick guy named Mr. Henderson, tried to argue that my app was a derivative work, a cheap copy of their technology. Alina stood up, cool as ice, and projected my entire codebase on the screen, line by line, showing the open source commits, the timestamps, the community contributions. She played a recording of a Nexus executive admitting in a private podcast that they saw Flow State as a threat and needed to crush it before it grew. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Mockiner, listened without blinking. When Alina finished, the courtroom was silent. Justice Mockiner turned to Mr. Henderson and said, "This appears to be a clear case of intellectual property intimidation, not infringement. I am dismissing all claims against Mr. Adler and his company. Furthermore, I am referring Nexus Dynamics for investigation into bad faith litigation practices." I did not cry, I did not cheer. I just sat there numb, as the weight I had been carrying for 8 months finally lifted off my shoulders. People started clapping. Alina hugged me, her eyes wet. My parents were in the back row, my dad with his head in his hands, my mom smiling through tears. I walked out of that courthouse into the Johannesburg sun and felt like I had been reborn. But the fight was not over. I still had to prove that Flow State was not just legally sound, but better. We launched Flow State 2-3 months later, and it changed everything. With the legal cloud gone, developers who had been scared to contribute finally jumped in. We added features Nexus had only dreamed of: real-time collaboration, AI-driven task prioritization, seamless integration with every major platform. We kept the core free, just like I promised, but introduced optional enterprise tools for businesses that wanted advanced analytics. The same community that had funded my legal fees became my beta testers, my marketers, my evangelists. Within 6 months, we had 500,000 users. Within a year, we had 2 million. Nexus tried to pivot, releasing their own updated version, but it felt clunky, corporate, soulless. Flow State was built by the people for the people, and everyone could feel the difference. Tech blogs started writing about the kid from Johannesburg who took on a giant and won. Investors who had ignored my emails now offered me millions. I turned most of them down. I did not need their money. I needed to stay true to what we had built. By the time I turned 22, Flow State was the industry standard, used by everyone from freelance designers to Fortune 500 companies. I hired my first employee, Dev Linus, the engineer from Berlin who had believed in me when I barely believed in myself. I brought Sarah on as a consultant, not because we ever got back together, but because I owed her no hard feelings. She had been scared, and I understood that now. My parents stopped asking why I could not get a normal job. They started telling everyone at church what their son had built. I still have that cease and desist email framed on my office wall. It is not a trophy. It is a reminder that the moments that almost break you are often the ones that forge you into who you are meant to be. I was 19 when I started Flow State. I was 20 when they tried to destroy it. I was 21 when I proved that passion, community, and truth can beat money and power every single time. And I am here now, alive and victorious, because I refuse to let fear write my story. What Jake faced with Nexus was incredibly unkind, because powerful people tried to crush him before he had the chance to fully stand on his own feet. But he did not fold, and that mattered because Alina, Dev Linus, and the wider community helped turn a legal threat into living proof that truth can outlast intimidation. That is why his victory feels bigger than money, because he protected both his work and his sense of self when fear would have been the easier choice. And that brings us to one final story about what happens when a person has burned everything down, faced the truth, and finally learns that being strong does not mean being alone. So let us read the next story together. I burned every bridge at 20 and accidentally built a 75,000 MRR company out of the ashes. I was on my bathroom floor refreshing my Stripe dashboard when it finally hit zero again. Not metaphorically, literally $0, 0 cents, after 3 straight months of trying to brute force my way into building a startup that nobody wanted. And the worst part was I had already told everyone I was going to make it work. My parents, my friends, even my younger sister Maya, who used to look at me like I had things figured out. And now I was hiding in a locked bathroom at 2 a.m., trying not to throw up from the mix of caffeine and panic, because I had just spent my last 800 on ads that converted exactly nobody. My company at the time was called Clarity Flow, which already sounds like something doomed to fail, and it was supposed to be this AI-driven productivity system for freelancers, except I had never actually talked to a freelancer in my life. I just assumed I knew what people needed because I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and convinced myself I was different. I stopped answering texts because every conversation felt like a reminder I was falling behind, and when my dad asked me at dinner how things were going, I snapped at him so hard he just nodded and said okay. And that was the moment I realized I was officially alone, not in a cool founder grind way, but in a pathetic, self-inflicted isolation that made everything heavier. The next morning I got an email from Stripe saying my account balance was insufficient for a pending charge. And that was it. I closed my laptop and just sat there staring at the wall, thinking this was where it ended. Not with a big failure, but with a quiet fade out nobody would notice. Around noon, I got a random message from a guy named Daniel Park on a founder forum I had posted in weeks earlier when I was still pretending things were fine. He said he saw my post about struggling with traction and asked if I wanted to join a free weekly founder group. He was running over Discord, no pitch, no upsell, just people trying to not crash and burn alone. I almost ignored it because by that point I had convinced myself nobody could help me, but something about the way he said free made it feel like there was nothing left to lose, so I joined. The first call was brutal, not because anyone attacked me but because they asked real questions, like who exactly is your customer? What problem are you solving? Why would anyone pay you? And I had no answers that weren't vague or defensive. And for the first time, I heard how ridiculous I sounded when I tried to explain my product. There was a woman named Priya Shah on the call who ran a small but profitable SaaS. And she said something that stuck with me harder than anything else. She said you are not failing because you are not smart enough. You are failing because you are building in isolation and guessing instead of listening. And I remember just sitting there muted, feeling like someone had finally translated what I had been doing wrong. Daniel messaged me after and offered to look at my onboarding and pricing for free, and I expected some generic advice, but instead he tore everything apart, not in a mean way but in a precise way that made it impossible to ignore. He pointed out I had 3 different pricing tiers that made no sense, features nobody understood, and 0 clear outcome for the user. It was like I had built a maze and expected people to enjoy getting lost. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something I had avoided for months. I talked to actual users, not friends, not people who wanted to be nice, but freelancers who had never heard of me, and almost all of them told me the same thing. They did not care about my system. They cared about getting more clients without burning out. So I rebuilt everything around that single outcome. I simplified Clarity Flow into one core offer, a weekly planning system paired with client pipeline tracking, and I cut all the fluff. Pricing went from 3 confusing tiers to 1 clear option at $29 a month, with a promise that if it did not help them close at least 1 new client in 30 days, they could get a refund, which terrified me because it meant I actually had to deliver. The first sale after the rebuild came from a guy named Lewis Morno who found me through a Reddit comment, and when I saw the 29 hit my account, I felt this weird mix of relief and disbelief, like maybe I was not completely done yet. The group kept me accountable in a way nothing else had. Every week I had to show what I did, what worked, what failed, and I could not hide behind excuses because everyone else was going through their own version of the same struggle. There were nights I wanted to disappear again, especially when growth stalled at around 2,000 MRR after 3 months. But Daniel kept pushing me to focus on retention and referrals instead of chasing new users blindly. And Priya helped me redesign the onboarding so people actually understood the value within the first hour. Slowly things started to compound. 1 user turned into 2, 2 into 10, and then referrals kicked in harder than anything I had seen before because the product actually solved a real problem. By month 8, I crossed 10,000 MRR, which felt unreal considering where I started. But it also came with a new kind of pressure, because now it was not just about survival, it was about not screwing up something that was finally working. Around that time, my relationship with my family started to shift too, not because I suddenly became successful, but because I stopped shutting them out. I told my dad the truth about how bad things had been, and instead of saying "I told you so," he just said he was glad I was still trying, which hit harder than any lecture could have. The real turning point came around month 12, when I launched a simple community feature inside Clarity Flow where users could share wins and strategies, basically recreating the support group dynamic that saved me, and that exploded engagement in a way I did not expect. Churn dropped, referrals spiked, and revenue started climbing faster than anything before. 14 months after that bathroom floor moment, I opened Stripe again and saw 75,000 MRR. And this time I did not feel like refreshing it 100 times to make sure it was real. I just sat there and let it sink in that the thing I almost killed through isolation had only survived because I finally let other people in. The part that matters most to me now is not the number, it is what came after. Because the first thing I did once things stabilized was fund Daniel's group, so it could stay free and scale to more founders who were exactly where I had been, broke, exhausted, convinced they were the problem, when really they just needed perspective and people who would tell them the truth. I still think about that version of me on the bathroom floor sometimes, and the difference between him and who I am now is not intelligence or luck. It is that he tried to do everything alone, and I learned that building something real is almost impossible without a community that refuses to let you disappear when things get hard. Tonight we spent time with writers who were doubted, cornered, abandoned, overworked, humiliated, and pushed into some very dark places. Again and again, the same truth kept rising through all that pain. A person can lose comfort, approval, money, health, and certainty, and still not lose who they are. That is what made these stories matter. Not the numbers on the screen, not the deals, not the applause. It was the moment each writer stopped handing their worth to people who had not earned that power. Some of them found peace by standing alone for a season. Some found it by finally letting the right people stand beside them, and both kinds of courage matter. If there is one quiet lesson to carry from all of this, it is that boundaries are not cruelty, honesty is not weakness, and rebuilding your life slowly is still rebuilding. So as the night settles and your thoughts begin to soften, hold on to this. You do not need everyone to understand you in order to keep going. You do not need perfect timing to begin again. And you do not need to prove your value to people who only notice it after the struggle is over. Rest knowing that steady effort still counts, healing still counts, and protecting your peace still counts. Take care of yourselves, establish those boundaries early, and sweet dreams, everyone.